Want to advertise your business in a cost-effective way? It's time to give podcast advertising a try. Research shows a high rate of podcast listeners made a purchase as a result of an ad they heard on a podcast. Visit podbean.com/brands to launch a cost-effective podcast advertising campaign in minutes. That's podbean.com/brands.
Lady Justice is a true crime podcast, therefore deals with incidents of violence, disturbing imagery and explicit content. Listener discretion is advised. The Lady Justice podcast wishes to offer their deepest condolences to the victims' families and wishes to offer thanks to those that work in emergency services. Hello my lovelies and welcome to Lady Justice, a true crime podcast. Lady Justice is a weekly podcast that covers fascinating cases, both past and present. My name is Chantel and I'm your friendly true crime junkie with slight caffeine addiction issues. I hope you're all doing very well and enjoying a wonderful week, and as always, before I get into this week's episode, I just want to ask you guys to please support this podcast by subscribing, rating, leaving a review, and because sharing is caring, I do want you to pass it on to a friend. It would make the world of difference. If you would like to contact me about anything at all, please feel free to do so via social media or my email, which you'll find in the show notes. This week's episode may be a little short, and I am really sorry that I missed last week's episode, but it was due to unforeseen circumstances, and if I'm completely honest, I'm still trying to catch up with myself. But I should be back on it properly next week. I'm a huge football fan, and I have been since I was a tiny human. When I was researching, I found this very interesting, and I was unsure why it's not more commonly known. An outstanding centre-half, the budding Aston Villa player Tommy Ball became the first and only active English professional footballer to be murdered. In this episode, we discuss how a quarrel over chickens in the late evening of November 11th, 1923, turned deadly. So, without further ado, I want to give a little background before we get into it. This case takes place in Birmingham, in the West Midlands. It's the second most populated city in England behind the capital London, and has a rich and vibrant history. My favourite thing about Birmingham though, it's where Cadbury's the chocolate company was founded. This episode is based a little back in time, 1923, and at the time it was considered the greatest tragedy that had struck the game of football, taking place 35 years before the Munich air disaster, 62 years before the Bradford fire, and 66 years before Hillsborough, but nonetheless it remains one of English football's darkest moments. As always, all my sources will be listed in the show notes. So let's just get on it like a car bonnet. Born on February the 11th, 1900, in the County Durham town of Chesterley Street, Thomas Edgar Ball was a typical northern lad who enjoyed a game of football. He was one of 9 siblings that grew up working class, living off their father's coal mining wage. They understood what it was to work an honest day's pay and to be part of a tight-knit and loving family. Tommy, as he was more commonly known, attended the local primary school in Unsworth and quickly was noticed as a pretty decent football player, winning his first medal for his school team aged 10. On leaving school at 13, he took employment working down the pits at the local colliery, as was typical for the area at the time. His love for football never diminished, and he continued to play for his colliery teams, becoming a figure that spectators loved to see grace the field. Soon, in 1919, the likes of Newcastle United were knocking at his door, offering him a chance to take a different life path. His mother's Italian descent meant that he was a tall, handsome young man, and was easily recognisable with his strong features and slick-back dark hair. He was becoming a better player with every game. Even though he never appeared on the pitch in an official Magpies game, he did still play for his colliery team, Felling. His defensive style was unique, and in early 1920, Tommy was to get an offer that would change his life. By 1920, Aston Villa was one of the giants of the game and had been crowned champions of the English Football League 6 times, winning a further 6 FA Cups along the way. They had noticed the striking northerner and signed Tommy on January the 20th, 1920, partly as a cover for the famously abrasive Frank Barson, a player that had once received a 7-month ban from the game and frequently needed police escorts to keep him separated from furious fans. But that's a different story for a different time. The other reason was because football is a national pastime, when family and friends enjoy a pie and a bovril while screaming at a group of men running around a pitch. Teams often relied on these grassroots players and fan favourites such as Tommy to fill grounds on match day. During his first season with Villa, he had limited time on the field, but by his second season, after Barson left for Manchester United in 1922, he became the team's first choice centre-back, establishing himself as an outstanding defence player, with many noting appearances for England's national team were in his near future. He had settled into life in Birmingham well. An eligible bachelor with good looks and a friendly nature, he soon made friends and found a woman to fall in love with. On May 7, 1922, he married Beatrice Richards, the daughter of a local pork butcher and pie maker. They were a typical couple, still in the honeymoon stages, when they found a new place to live in the October of the same year. The prospect of a bigger home meant they could consider starting a family, which excited them both. During the first half of the 20th century, it was far more common to rent than to buy, and the couple had a steady income due to Tommy's career and £7 a week wage. Finding a small yet comfortable stone semi-detached home at the Summerfield Cottages on Brickkiln Lane, Parry Bar, in the north of the city, they began to settle down into their new life together. Everything in life was looking rosy for the newlyweds. The owner of Summerfield Cottages was George Stagg, who lived in the neighbouring property to his new tenants. Mr. Stagg was a 45-year-old father of 4 with a moustache that even I would be proud of. Have a look on the Instagram page for a photo. It is bloody epic. During his younger years, he had served in the army in Sudan and Egypt before returning to Birmingham in 1904. He then served as a policeman, earning him a reputation as a respectable gentleman. When the First World War broke out, he was re-enlisted, but whilst away he was gassed, wounded in the calf, and declared unfit for duty. Upon his return to Blighty, he took several jobs in various factories, saving every penny he could to buy the cottages on Brickkiln Lane in 1921, providing security and a passive income from rent for his family. George Stagg was known to be a bit of a short-tempered chap, and quickly after the couple moved in, relations with the Balls became strained. One of the significant irritations between Stagg and Tommy Ball was the fact that the Villa player kept chickens and a dog, which would often stray into Stagg's garden. Stagg was so infuriated by this, he had actually threatened to poison the chickens on numerous occasions, and in August 1923, the landlord-tenant relationship strained even further. Stagg then gave Tommy and Beatrice notice that they should vacate the property. However, this eviction notice was never implemented, and 3 months later, the Balls were still leasing the cottage from George Stagg. On November 10, 1923, Villa was playing away at Notts County's Meadow Lane ground. 12,000 spectators lined the pitch as both teams battled it out. Cheers filled the air as Villa's Billy Curtin scored the winning goal, taking Villa up to 3rd in the league. Tommy left it all on the pitch, proving himself to be a valuable member of the team. It was his 77th appearance for Aston Villa that day. On the evening of Sunday, November 11th, the day after the match at Nottingham, Tommy and his wife walked to the Church Tavern pub, where Ball drank 3.5 pints of ale. Pubs back in those days closed at 9:30, and the couple decided they would catch the bus back home. Shortly after arriving at around 10 p.m, Tommy had gone into his garden to exercise his dog for a while. Having a little play in the garden amongst the chickens, Beatrice was preparing some supper in the kitchen when she heard an argument coming from the garden. It was the usual case that the chickens had made their way into the landlord's garden and that Tommy was playing with his dog a little too loud. Then the shouts became louder. Suddenly, she jumped as she heard a loud bang. It's a distinctive sound. She knew it instantly. It was a gunshot. Running outside to investigate, she saw her husband staggering towards her in a distressed state. "Oh, Bella," he gasped. "He's shot me," before taking his hands from his chest, exposing a large crimson wound. Fear gripped Beatrice. Her heartbeat filled her ears before she snapped back and could hear Stagg shouting towards her. "You'd better get in. Can't you see that Tommy's been shot?" she cried at her middle-aged neighbour, not yet understanding the situation in front of her. Then the realisation hit. It was Stagg that had shot Tommy. He wasn't just shouting at them, he was shrieking abuse at them, his face alight with fury, spitting words of rage. He began to lift his arms, eyes squinting. As she began to open her mouth to scream, another shot was fired, and she felt the wind go past her. The bullet had missed her by inches. Her eyes fixed on Tommy as she watched him collapse to the ground. Within minutes, whilst being cradled by his wife, Tommy died from his wounds. After the incident, Mr. Stagg made no endeavour to escape and was detained at the scene. George Stagg was then taken to West Bromwich Police Station. Stagg told the police that he had heard the sound of someone entering into his backyard and went out with his shotgun and fired it to intimidate them. This being his first shot, which Mr. Stagg insists did not hit Tommy, and the second shot came quickly after as a result of an altercation, with the trigger accidentally being pulled. In a statement to the police, Stagg stated, "I pushed him back with the muzzle of my gun, and he caught hold of the gun and tried to wrench it off me. I wrenched the gun away from him. I slipped back and the gun went off. A sudden jerk and off it went. I immediately went out and did all I could for him." The gun used in this deadly attack was a 12-bore Webley & Scott sports shotgun, which left a void in Tommy Ball's chest the size of a half-crown coin, just a little over 3 centimetres in diameter. Stagg's story was riddled with holes. There were 2 witnesses, the landlord of the church tavern and the bus conductor, who both insisted that Ball had been entirely sober. Stagg had said Ball had been trying to climb over his gate, but in reality he could have just stepped over the small wall instead. And what was Stagg doing with a cocked and reloaded shotgun to push a man off a gate? The police did not believe his account, and Mr. George Stagg was charged with willful murder and remanded until his trial began the following year. The trial was overseen by Mr. Justice Sidney Rowlatt, who was a special advisor to King George V as a member of the Privy Council and most famously the namesake of the Rowlatt Act, which was used in British India from 1919 until 1922. It was an unpopular piece of legislation that allowed for more police powers and gave the courts the power to detain those without warrant and grant indefinite detention without trial for prescribed political acts in India. The accused were denied the right to know their accusers and the evidence that was used in the trial. This just gives you an idea of how stern this judge was. He was renowned for being educated, quick to see a point, and unafraid to make his mind up. The trial began in Stafford on February 19, 1924. Stagg would continue to insist that the shooting of Tommy Ball was an accident. There was no malice or aforethought, he testified to the court. Then, when making a statement to the jury, he went on to say, "It was quite an accident. My dog was barking as Ball was going past my garden gate, and he was shouting to the dog to stop it. I jumped out of the chair in which I had been dozing. I told my dog to go in, and Ball, who was under the influence of drink, shouted at me, 'Go in and go to bed or I will bash your brains out.' I said, 'Now Tom, go in and go to bed, there's a good chap.' Mrs. Stagg was up at the window, having gone to bed, and shouted from the window, 'Go in and don't make a noise to wake the children.' Ball shouted to Mrs. Stagg, 'I will bash your brains out,' and went to climb over the garden gate. The gate was latched and bolted. I had the gun in my hand when I went to the gate to see what the matter was because the dog was barking. I told him to get off the gate and go to bed and used the gun to frighten him. He went away and came back again and tried to get over the gate again. He also added that Tommy Ball was often under the influence of alcohol and was known to be aggressive towards Mrs. Ball, stating to the jury that his neighbour used to knock his wife about and was frequently under the influence of drink. However, Beatrice vigorously disputed these allegations in the courtroom, defending her husband. She continued that her husband was a moderate drinker, but sober on the night of the murder, and the pair had been happily married and Tommy had never struck her. Tommy Ball's integrity and respectable manner was further strengthened by the respected Aston Villa trainer, Alfred Mills, who informed the court of Tommy's excellent character. Stagg admitted it was quite true that Tommy could have just walked into his garden without going over the gate, but that was his story and he was going to stick to it. To test the defence's theory out, the judge took the gun, cocked it and struck it against the bench without moving the mechanism. He did it again and still there was no accidental fire. Stagg then took the gun, walked over to the gate, which had been erected in the court as an exhibit. He then struck the top of it. The gun clicked. The defence also presented a specialist who, having studied Ball's injuries, said that most certainly the gun could not have been at Stagg's shoulder, and contended that Tommy Ball's movements after the fatal shot were more consistent with his having staggered back after letting go of a gun than if he had been holding the gun when he was shot. The fact that Stagg was also a veteran of the Great War and the date of the crime, November 11th, were also presented, stating that he was distressed and of a heightened awareness and not of his usual sound mind. Now, unfortunately, due to the passing of time, 96 years, much of the evidence and testimony has been lost. There are no medical records remaining in relation to this case. The jury only took a mere 1 hour and 40 minutes to submit the guilty verdict, though they did recommend that the judge show leniency towards the 45-year-old former soldier and policeman George Stagg. The judge refused Stagg's application for appeal and sentenced him to death. However, the sentence was reviewed by the new Home Secretary at the time, who granted a reprieve, and the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. 3 years later, George Stagg was declared insane and moved to Broadmoor, the high-security psychiatric hospital. He would die in the mental health unit at Highcroft Hospital, Birmingham, in 1966, at the age of 87. Tommy's funeral was held on November 19, 1923, and was reported as a grand occasion by newspapers of the time. The funeral procession began from the butcher's shop of Beatrice Ball's father, William Richards, at 200 High Street, Aston. 7 coaches and several cars made their way through the Lion Street to the packed St. John's Church, Perry Bar. Thousands of fans had come to pay their respects to the fallen footballer. Tommy's former teammates acted as pallbearers. There were floral tributes from local football clubs as well as from Middlesbrough, close to his birthplace. Fans showed why the British football community is one of the greatest in the world at the Saturday match previous to the funeral. Organising a collection for Tommy's widow, Beatrice, they raised £127, equating to about £6,700 today. Tommy Ball was buried in St. John's Churchyard in an ornate grave decorated with footballs. The following poem was written shortly after Ball's murder. 'Twas on a Sabbath evening in drear November days. 2 friends were heard creating in Perry Berry's byways. High words just fed the anger, now this young man's life is fled. A shot and then another, and Thomas Ball lies dead. As for Aston Villa, they proceeded without Tommy Ball, finishing 6th and losing 2-0 to Newcastle United in the FA Cup final. So that is it for this week. An act of kindness is needed to make this world a little more beautiful to live in. This week, I just want you to change your habits a tad. Buy local and shop small. We are all buying gifts and such at this time of year, and yes, those 3 for 2 offers are nice down at the local shopping centre, but Take some time to go look up a local business and purchase something. That small business is someone's livelihood, and you will most definitely put a smile on their face. Pop into your local greengrocer or butcher or go buy a handmade gift on Etsy. Bring a smile to someone's face and help them succeed in their dreams. With that in mind, go be good people, go be kind, go be safe, and most importantly, go be happy.